On behalf of the University of Arkansas Text Program, I'd like to thank you for agreeing to share your story with us today. It's truly an honor to be able to interview you. Just so you know the structure of the interview a little bit, I'm going to start off with some biographical questions, and then we'll move into questions about your job and more of like your political views. Okay?
Right.
So when and where were you born?
I was born in Tibet. Yeah.
Do you know what region of Tibet?
I was born in southern tip of Tibet, very close to India. Yeah.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
I have 3 sisters right now.
Do you have any memories of Tibet?
Oh, that's very, very vague. I cannot really recall, though I was born there. Yeah.
So you were very young then?
Very, very young.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when exactly did you leave Tibet?
I left in 1959. Yeah.
And around how old were you?
Maybe about 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know why your parents decided to leave Tibet?
I think that was 1959 when His Holiness, after the Chinese occupied Tibet, especially Lhasa, the Dalai Lama escaped to India. So soon after that, my parents also left the country, Tibet.
Where did you first arrive when you arrived in exile?
I think that was most of the Tibetans. We arrived in Assam, in India. Yeah.
Did you attend school in Assam?
No.
No? Where did you attend school?
First from Assam, I think we had come to Dharamsala in the nurseries with the parents.
Can you describe your educational experience?
Yeah. From Dharamsala, we were sent, the first Tibetan school, central school for Tibet was established in Mussoorie. And we were sent from Dharamsala to Mussoorie. And I studied in Tibetan school in Mussoorie. Then when I finished standard 5, then I was shifted to one English school, that's a Waverley Convent of Jesus and Mary in Mussoorie itself.
Would you say that you got an education in Tibetan culture from the Convent of Jesus and Mary?
No. I was in the boarding school, so there was no Tibetan language. There were not many Tibetan children also, maybe 1 or 2 day scholars.
And did you finish school there, or did you continue to study?
Yeah, I completed my school from Waverley Convent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you pursue any further education after that?
Yeah, after that I went to the southern India in Bangalore.
Did you grow up as a Buddhist?
Pardon?
Did you grow up as a Buddhist?
Oh yes.
What role did Buddhism play in your upbringing?
Oh, see, Buddhism is a very, very important part of our life as a Tibetan. So from your young age, from childhood, as a Buddhist, what all we should we can do and what we should not do it. Even if nobody tells you you are a Buddhist, so we follow certain norms, not killing even insects. We don't, we try to avoid. So, and be honest and compassionate. That's what His Holiness always says.
Were you able to practice Buddhism at the boarding school?
Oh, no, I used to keep, I used to keep a photograph of His Holiness in my drawer and in the bedroom, So there, we were not, being a Roman Catholic school, there was no restriction as such. Like you don't have to go to the church, by force or anything. So.
Do you have any family still in Tibet? Do you have any family still living in Tibet?
Tibet, I don't think so, no. Yeah. My parents were here in India. Now they are no more.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
So you've worked with the NGO Mirada, is that right?
Mirada, yes.
Mirada, okay, thank you. Establishing Tibetan refugee camps in Karnataka. How did you get involved with this organization?
See, when I first left my school and I spent some time in the Tibetan settlement in South, and then I came across Myrada, an NGO which was taking care of establishing Tibetan settlements in the South, agricultural settlements. And they had an office, head office in Bangalore. So when I was studying there, I realized that that is a office set up for Tibetan settlements, and lots of Tibetans come there. So that's how I came to know about the office. And then while I was studying, they needed like help, because since they were dealing with the Tibetan settlements, there were language problem was there. Most of the officials that time were not talking English that much. So I started, as they asked me, I started working there.
What role did you play in the organization?
In the beginning, I was helping to find, college admissions or hostel accommodation for the young students coming to Bangalore, that time from the north. So I was helping that, and then at the same time, we had a very close link with the Tibetan settlements where the project was going on. So I used to help in that. And then simultaneously, I was working on the sponsorship program, because that time, our government also could not really, give scholarships for students. So from my office, we were trying to find, individual sponsors for, students to carry on with their further studies. Yeah.
What is the most profound experience you've had working with a Tibetan refugee?
Can you repeat that?
What is the most profound experience you've had working with a Tibetan refugee?
That was a very good experience at a very young age. I know that I had taken lots of responsibilities, because I knew it was very difficult for our Tibetan community to, really establish, unless each individual could help them, in their day-to-day, difficulties. So I thought it was my sort of a responsibility as a Tibetan. I cannot just say, I'm too young to work. I said, okay, I start working. So that is how I started working for my community. And
so from your experience, what do you think is the biggest problem facing the community in exile today?
Today, yeah. The biggest problem right now in the community is to preserve our culture, language, and to keep the identity.
Do you think women play a unique role in preserving Tibetan culture and history?
Women?
Do you think women play a unique role in preserving culture and history?
Yeah. In Tibetan community, although it is a small community, Tibetan women plays an important role in the community, in the education, in social activities, in many ways to preserve the culture. Women plays a very important role, and they are very active also.
So how did you come to be involved with the Tibetan Women's Association?
See, for a very long time, in my younger age, I was away from my own community, because I was studying in boarding school. Then I came down to Bangalore. I was studying in a hostel where, young women of different, nationalities were staying. So I didn't have very close contact with our Tibetan community. But then by 1994, I came back to the Tibetan settlement, and I started working for the Tibetan community under the leadership of the representative of Tibetan settlement in South. So since then, I've been 100% involved with the Tibetan community, and then Tibetan Women's Association also. I started from that time.
How long have you worked for the Tibetan Women's Association?
When I came to Bailakupi, that is, in South, that is where my parents were also settled. I was working in the office as a project officer, and then the Tibetan Women's Association, that's the regional chapter, So the president came and asked me, can you become a member? So that time I didn't have much idea about what the Women's Association meant and what they were doing. So I said, it's a Tibetan Women's Association, so I'll definitely become a member. So I became a member. So from then onwards, I became a group leader, then regional chapter president, and then central, executive member, posted outside. Like that, my life went on, between the office and the Tibetan Women's Association. Yeah.
Can you describe some of the projects you worked on as a regional leader of the Tibetan Women's Association?
For the Women's Association,
yes.
Okay. When I became the president of Regional Tibetan Women's Association in Bailakope, that was in the year 2000. The Women's Association had a project, for the upliftment of Tibetan women who really need to survive, who are having lots of problems. So they had a tailoring center, Women's Association had set up. But that time, the financial situation was so bad. They didn't have a proper, a building for training, neither the office. Today we clean up, the next morning you go and the office is completely down again with the water and the leaves. So although we had a small plot which was leased from the Tibetan Cooperative Society, the building was not good enough for, giving training to the, young women and to have an office there. So I kept on thinking about how to, change the situation. And then I felt, okay, so I knew some foreigners closely. I said, NGOs. So I said, why not raise some funds and build a, a office come tailoring center. So started working along with my executive members and somehow managed to, gather some funds to build that building. That's a one ground floor storing. And on one side we have the office, a big room. Then another side we had the tailoring center where say about 10 to 15 young ladies can, work together. And then the third room is for those who pass the training. If they want to work with the Tibetan Women's Association, they could occupy that room and work with us, and we pay 60%. So whatever they do, we pay 60% to them. And all the materials met by the Tibetan Women's Association. So that had, that sponsorship money, came in time, and we managed to set up the office and tailoring center. And that really solved lots of problems. And then simultaneously, we had to sell what we have stitched. So we set up another small shop we have taken on lease from the society. And we start displaying our goods in that small shop. And at the same time, we started purchasing, gift items from the women's centers, handicraft centers from different parts of India. And put it in our workshops, shop, so that they also get some help and we also could, help ourselves. So that is how we started. Yeah.
What kinds of women do you work with in the exile community and what problems do they face?
See, at the initial stage, most of the young, older generation, the problem with them is they did not have education, background education, forget about the modern education, even Tibetan language also very low. So, but they are very, sort of determined to, work for the Tibetan Women's Association, Tibetan community. So they become members, and whatever work you give them, they are always willing and they are there to do the job. But otherwise, in say okay, in the office, we have very, limited, ladies who can really help in handling various, situations. Right.
What are some of the problems that the younger generations of women face?
Now.
Yes.
Younger generations now is, unlike those days, now younger generation, we talk about equality, gender equality. So for them, now marriage and things are not that important. Those days the women used to get married at early age. And parents also get used to, they get worried about if the girl is not married. But these days, young women, they want to study more and more. And they want to work alongside men so that they'll be independent. They don't have to depend on anybody. So these days, the marriage is also very late, and women like to study more and they become more independent in their life. So at the same time, they have various types of problems also in the society. Yeah.
What problems do women in Tibet today face?
What?
Women in Tibet today, what problems do they face?
See, women in Tibet as you see, they are not at all, the human rights violation is very, very high under the Chinese rule. And first of all, they cannot, have their own family planning by themselves. The Chinese government plans for them. There was a time, the women could have only one child. And if by mistake also, if she has the second or third one, her job will go away. And her, all the benefits are taken away from her, and she'll be kicked out from the job. But even then, the Tibetan population, first of all, the population is very low, 6 million Tibetans. Out of that, more than 1.5 million, the Chinese have already wiped out. So now the main, risk or danger the Tibetan community is facing is the population. Our population is going down drastically in Tibet as well as in exile. Say in Tibet, under the Chinese rule, under the, both, repressive rule, we have lost 150 odd, young people who self-immolated. So that means we are losing, young Tibetans, the monks and nuns, within such, there was a time, every day there was one self-immolation. So we are losing so much of our lives there. So population is in a big risk.
Have you ever discussed these problems with a Chinese person or a Chinese organization?
If we ever discuss this?
Like these problems that
Yeah.
Tibetan women face.
See, we keep addressing these problems open everywhere. Whether the Chinese listen to us or not is a big question. Chinese never listen to anybody except themselves. So it is very difficult to talk to the Chinese leaders on any case.
Have you ever gotten a response from a Chinese leader on these issues?
Have you?
Has a Chinese leader ever responded to your publications of these human rights violations?
See, human rights violation, there are lots of, appeals and, condemnations going across to Chinese government. See, through the United Nations, through the world leaders, through the Tibetan NGOs and other Tibet support groups. One after the other, the appeals are, going to the Chinese government, asking them to, human rights violation should be, stopped and they should improve. They are not able to, Tibetans are not able to do a, small thing by themselves without being punished by the Chinese government. So Chinese are not in a state to listen.
Many women in China outside of the Tibetan community face the same problems that you were discussing that Tibetan women face. So like the one-child
Chinese
policy.
men, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you ever consider extending the reach of the Tibetan Women's Association to advocate for these women in China who also face these human rights violations?
Yes. See, Tibetan Women's Association, we are here to advocate about the human rights violation by the Chinese government in Tibet. And not only Tibetan women, Tibetan people, but there are lots of other, population, their own Chinese population, they are also suffering. And then there are this other, even the Muslims, even the, there's another Uyghur, All these populations are, like clamped by the Chinese. So they don't have a freedom like, like the Tibetans. But Tibetans are still worse. They just wanted to wipe out Tibetan race completely, So that is the major problem we are facing, and whoever is there, just like Tibetan people who are facing, Chinese atrocity, we try to talk to them and we try to, share our views. They are not the only one who is suffering. The Tibetan people are suffering, so we all are same. Yeah.
And to go back to your career, how did you become president of the Tibetan Women's Association?
Yeah, okay. We have if I tell you briefly about how the Tibetan Women's Association leaders are elected, we believe in democracy, whether it's grassroots level or at the higher level. So we have an election. Every 3 years we have election for electing our representatives from the members. So whether it is in the regional chapters or in the head office, we have election after every 3 years, and during that annual general body meeting, we have all the executive members from the regional chapters will meet here in the head office, and we have about nearly 3 to 4 days meeting, and on the last day of the meeting, then we will do the election. And that all those who are present during this annual general body meeting can vote for the next team. And once you have selected 7, 8 or 20 members from the group, then out of that again the second vote will go for final election of the president, secretary, vice president, things like that. So we have a very good system.
As a leader in the Tibetan community, did you face any challenges being a woman?
Yes and no. As a woman, we always say that the women are empowered, we have full equality and things like that. But at the same time, you really doubt whether it is really working out that way, especially in the workforce. Maybe in the education system, women get the same equal rights. The moment the girl reaches her age, she also goes to school and nobody will stop. Parents will not stop. The government, they encourage. And the young girls, they come out from their schools with the flying colors, results. Much, much better than boys. Then they go for university studies and things like that and come out. And after that, when you start looking for a job and things, that will take a long time where you land. And even in the working system, whether it's a government sector or in private, how well a woman is educated. That same equality, opportunity, I feel that it's not there even now. But many people say when Tibetan Women's Association raised this topic, then many people say that, we are giving the opportunity, women are not taking the opportunity, not using the opportunity. So maybe there's some drawbacks from women's side also. I cannot deny that. Because women is all round, from morning till night she is on the job. Whether it's a housewife or office work, sending children to school. So women has got more responsibility in the family than a man. He may do his job, going to the office and coming back. But from morning, as you get up from your bed, till, everything is settled down in the night, a woman has got a full, responsibility. So when a girl, lady is working and she gets a job with a better salary and better posting and she is transferred to another area, that is the time when the woman loses her opportunity. Because thinking of her family, who's going to take care of the family, then she refuses to take that post. And that is a disadvantage for the women. A man can say, okay, my wife will look after the family, I can take up the post because it's a good chance. But a woman, she is more attached to the family. She feels, she is responsible for the full family. And she cannot leave the, old parents and children and, husband and go somewhere else and, just work in the office and keep quiet. That is not her way of thinking. So that is where women are, disadvantaged.
You said the Tibetan Women's Association raises this issue.
Yeah.
Do you do anything further to help alleviate the problem?
Yes, mostly they create more seats for women, and there again the women has to accept that posting wherever she gets the posting. If she's willing to face the thing, maybe she'll get a better chance. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to phrase this question in my mind.
Can I take a sip of
Yeah, go ahead. In the future, do you think that more could be done to help these women who are trying to balance?
Yes, positively. Yeah, we are working very hard, and Tibetan women are also, individual women are also working very hard to, get a better place in the society. And one thing I can tell you, the Tibetan people have got a leader who is always supportive for women. Okay, and through his, guidance, advices to various, departments or leaders of our Tibetan society, I think things will improve for the Tibetan women.
Do you have any children yourself?
No, I don't have. Yeah.
Do you think that the culture here is changing so that fathers can take on more responsibility, or do you see it as being kind of more stagnant in that respect?
Can you repeat that once again?
Do you think the culture here is changing so that the responsibility,
what is changing?
the culture
Yeah.
is changing so that the responsibility of raising children isn't just on the mother and is, more evenly distributed between father and mother?
Yeah, it is changing. Yes, that is one of the big topics that we have in our community, and young people, young married people also, due to their day to day work and raising children, they find it very difficult. But at the same time, His Holiness is also worried about. We are also worried about. If we don't have any, young children coming up, our population is going down. So Tibetan Women's Association, we are trying to, encourage younger generation. Husband and wife should share their, work in the house, and make it little easy for the woman, the mother, so that she can have at least 2-3 children. And education for these children is not that difficult now, because the Tibetan government in exile is doing their best to give the best education to the children, and then NGOs are also working very hard, and education is not difficult for children. But only thing, young Tibetans should have a they should not say it's very difficult for me to have more children. So they have to sacrifice, each one has to sacrifice from their side to have a to improve the population, and simultaneously, of course, it should not affect their lifestyle. So we try to encourage them by sponsoring or finding scholarships for parents who have got more children. So that's what we are doing right now. Yeah.
You mentioned the Dalai Lama is an advocate for women's rights.
Yes.
When he speaks out on women's equality, how is that received by the Tibetan community? Is there any controversy surrounding that?
No, I don't see any controversy in the society, because what he is trying to teach us, or wherever he goes, is a mother's, a woman's nature. She's more, loving, more compassionate, she's more peaceful, and if there are more women leaders in the world, there'll be more peace in the world. So that's why even in a family, if the lady is good, for example, His Holiness's mother, he has learned everything from his mother. She is the guru, he says. So she, being a mother, was a very, very compassionate mother, very understanding, And that is how he developed, from her, how to take care of the people of the world, not only the Tibetans. So that is what he always conveys to the people wherever he goes, that mother, any woman, she can play a very, very important role in the society, in the world. So that is because of her, compassion. Yeah.
What are the most difficult parts of your job?
Pardon?
What are the most difficult parts of your job?
Oh, difficult job. Sometimes it is really difficult to make certain decisions. But day to day, okay, it's okay. But only thing, there are certain decisions that we have to make, to bring a big change in the, community, or especially in the women's, life. So that is the time, I find most difficult.
Can you describe one of those big decisions that you've had to make?
Yeah. See, we were talking about right now about the Tibetan population. So we try to speak to a young couple, say this is the case now, Tibetan situation is like this, in Tibet it's like this, in exile it's like this. So you all have to cooperate, to improve your family strength. So it should be, very sweet to her, soothing to her to, listen to us also. At the same time, we expect to get a positive answer from any women to agree to, certain points that we raise. It's not for the sake of only Tibetan Women's Association. It's a Tibetan community on the whole. So those type of topics, it's very, very difficult. Then at the same time, when we talk about equality, gender equality, mostly the opposite sex, they feel that we are only fighting for women's right. Women's right is different from what the Tibetan Women's Association is talking about. We are not talking about what you call it, we want a full, sort of a power like men. But we should get, some sort of a equalize, okay? And whether it's a position in the job or whether in the family, sometimes, even men, they don't really, either they refuse to realize or they don't realize how the housewife is facing. So that is why we have to make it very clear to the, person that two people should work together if you want to, develop your family or community. So those type of topics, young people also, when it comes to, listening, they say, so I come first. What I want, I must get. Even the older generation also say, we think like that, so how can you change like that? So these type of problems, if we don't interfere, again that is wrong. If we interfere also, we face those type of problems.
What motivates you to overcome those difficulties?
Yeah, we are trying to entice the younger couple, saying that we will help you to, overcome your problems. Say we are thinking of, establishing some, nurseries, nurseries for, small children where the working people, couple are more in the settlements or anywhere else. And then if the parents are, economically, not well off, we are trying to find individual sponsors for the children to go to school so that the parents will not face that much. But on the whole, our Tibetan government in exile is doing their best to meet all these demands to educate our Tibetan children and help the parents also. So we are doing our best.
Does Buddhist philosophy play a role in the daily operations of the Tibetan Women's Association or in facing those difficulties?
Yeah, Buddhist, it's inborn in us, Even if we, knowingly, we will never try to do something wrong or harm somebody else. But sometimes, without realizing, you can make a mistake and hurt somebody else. So these things can happen, but we try our best to be good, like we cannot be like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but we try to learn from him what is a good. It's not always that I must have everything, I must enjoy. We have to think about the others also. So that is how we learn. Yeah, that's a Buddhist.
We've talked a lot about like women in domestic situations. Is there a gap in like political rights for women, Tibetan women in exile?
Political rights.
Yes.
So actually, when the Tibetan government was formed in exile, the lack of education and exposure. When we first formed our parliament, we didn't have any Tibetan women representing the Tibetan women. And that was not because they were not given an opportunity, but there were no women who can really stand. But as the years passed by, one or two women came, again they went off, disappeared. So like that we had, inequality that time. And it's not caused by the government or anything like that, because due to lack of education and exposure. But now, at the moment, Tibetan women have increased their, capability or opportunity, whatever it is. We have, like plenty of Tibetan women in the parliament. They are representing the Tibetan, people. And of course, even in the ministerial level also. Right now we don't have a woman, but we will have definitely. And the Tibetan women, there are quite a number of women who are holding good positions, but we still expect more women, at the decision-making level. Yeah.
What do you think is the future of women's status in Tibet and in exile?
Women's status, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
See, in Tibet, I cannot say exactly what the status is going to be, because they are completely controlled by the Chinese, and they are not able to make their own decisions or move around freely like we are doing it here. But then slowly, in spite of all the, drawbacks or difficulties in Tibet, Tibetan youngsters are getting educated by themselves against the Chinese will, because our own language is not surviving in Tibet now. The Chinese are changing the complete school syllabus. They are forced to learn everything by in Chinese language. But our young people, whether it's girls or boys, they are doing very well. So I think it will not be very difficult for us to say that they are also, quite capable of, coming up in life. As when you think of education and status. Women's status also, there are lots of women, only thing the Chinese are not letting them, perform what they can do it in their life. There are beautiful singers are there, poets are there, writers are there. But the moment they see a Tibetan, coming up with this type of thing, there's no clear sort of reason why they are kidnapping them or arresting them or putting them in prison. Anybody, in any free country, a young person can write poems, they can sing, they can do whatever they feel like, unless they don't break the law of the country. But in Tibet it is very different. But in spite of all these difficulties, we get many young Tibetans, with a beautiful, sort of what you call it, singing, dancing, and writing poets. So they have got the full thing. Even in India also, in exile, our youngsters are, doing very fine. They are well trained in schools and universities, and as they come out, they start their, they find their own, a future, whatever they want to do. So they work on it. Yeah.
So we talked about in the previous question about how there weren't really any women who were leaders in parliament when you were younger.
Yes.
So who did you look towards then for a role model?
See, we had the role model, although we had that time very few. See, for example, His Holiness's sister, Jizun Pamela, is there. Then His Holiness's younger brother's wife, Rinjin Khandru, she was the first president of Tibetan Women's Association, and then she became the education minister, I think, in the Tibetan government. And like her, there was when I was very small in Mussoorie, she was Rinjin Dolma, very strong woman like that. So we had few, role models are there. Even now, even in the younger generation also, there are few. But we really appreciate, like Jizun Pamela, and her full life is spent for the Tibetan children. So these few women are our role models. Yeah.
So we talked about public figures, but are there any figures that are personal to you that are your role models, like your mom
Tibetan
or your
women,
sister?
Tibetan women.
Yes.
Yeah, she's one of them. And then I really appreciate our ex-minister, what's her name? I forgot. Right now she is not in the position. She did not stand for the election, Gyari Dolma. She was an ex-Kalun. And then mostly just a few. Yeah.
What do you think the future of the Tibetan Women's Association looks like?
Future of a Tibetan Women's Association. I think, as I've said, we try to, Tibetan Women's Association, we have nearly 58 regional chapters besides the head office. That is in 4 continents, not only in India. So each chapter, is constantly in touch with the head office. And we try to get more and more members for Tibetan Women's Association. And early years, we had less of educated women. But now we will get more and more, younger and educated, women in the association. So I think Tibetan Women's Association's, like status will grow stronger than, what it was. When it was started in 1984 in India, re-established. It was started in Lhasa in 1959, March 12th. And that is why we say March 12th is the Tibetan Women's Uprising Day. That day is very, very important historically and in the Tibetan history. So that was the time we lost our, country completely to India, China. And then it was re-established in exile in 1984. And since then, for the past 58 years, the Tibetan women, we grew stronger and stronger.
So what happened in the period between 1959 and 1984?
Yeah.
Were there Tibetan women's associations that were like regional?
I think that is good question. See, 1959, when the Tibetans came into exile, till 1984, Tibetans had passed through lots of difficulties. People on the whole, not only Tibetan women. They left their own country, which is a very, very cold, and their diet was so different from what they eat in India. Okay, and then the climate change and the language problem, completely, changed life. And that also, when our older parents came from there, they were, in mid-30s and 40s like that. So it was very difficult for the Tibetan people to adjust the life in India and the climate and everything. And during that time, due to poverty and difficulties, they could really not think of, a Tibetan Women's Association as such, because during that uprising in Lhasa, thousands and thousands of Tibetan women gave up their life against the Chinese. So those who participated in that uprising also, many of them had come to India during 1959. So they were sort of settled down in India. And although we did not have a women's association as such, but there were 3 or 4 different locations where those older generation women, they set up their, like handicraft centers, where they could have a group of women working together, on Tibetan handicrafts and things like that. So that time they were called Tibetan Women's Handicraft Centers or something like that. There was no Women's Association. So 1984, when His Holiness reminded the Tibetan women in Dharamsala, say what happened to Tibetan Women's Association that was established in Lhasa in 1959. Then they just woke up, said okay, and they forgot their own like individual problems. Said okay, His Holiness reminded them, so we must do something. And immediately, those who were in Dharamsala, they got together and they start off this association here.
So we saw the pamphlet that said Tibetan women in the environment. Yeah. How does the Tibetan Women's Association promote environmental issues?
Yeah. Tibetan Women's Association, we have few different desks, research and media section. We have environment, then we have a project section. So in the environment, we do lots of, try to get lots of information from Tibet regarding, the environment in Tibet. It's a full swing destruction is going on in Tibet, damming the rivers and, mining all the Tibet's, resources being, mined and taken away from Tibet, then cutting the forest down. So this really affects not only Tibet, all the rivers, the 10 major, rivers coming from Tibet, that flows into Asian countries. And all these Asian countries are, surviving on this, using these rivers to survive, to make a livelihood. So when the Tibetan rivers are diverted, from the normal course, if they are diverted to another area, and then putting up huge dams to generate power, that is affecting not only Tibet, it's affecting the whole of Asia. So because of that, we cannot just keep quiet, because it's a big job for us. We cannot go to Tibet and study and come back. We can't go. We only have to wait for the information, what is happening in Tibet. And then building the, railway lines through the mountains that you see in Tibet, building railway lines through the mountains, that disturbs the complete ecosystem. That is why there's so much of landslides and so much of flood and erosion of land. And then what about the thing, our nomads? Their normal life is completely distorted by the Chinese. So due to all these problems, we try to concentrate in collecting the information from Tibet. And then we search, here also, whatever research we can do, and try to participate in the world's climate, change. See, Tibetan Women's Association, with all our financial difficulties, we have participated in COP21, and earlier to that also we have participated in all these climate conferences in Paris or different countries. So we are concerned about the climate. The ice is melting so fast. So it's not only the Tibetan people who suffer, because the whole of Asia will suffer. All the river, the level of the water is receding very fast. So that is why we are concentrating on environment also.
Do you promote any cleanup projects or environmental protection projects here in India?
See, we do lots of small, recently on the birthday of His Holiness, the 11th Panchen Lama, we normally do create awareness, not only among the Tibetan people, wherever we live Tibetans. We plant more trees, and we create awareness to the people that how to protect the environment, how to keep it clean, how to protect the trees, how to protect water. We do lots of projects. We are, say, about 2-3 NGOs together we are working. And every year we have this lobbying. Now this year also lobbying mostly in Delhi. So we visit all the important government embassies or offices, and discuss about the, climate change and environment issues.
So we've been talking a lot about political activism, and some may argue that because Buddhism is based or centered on the policy of non-attachment, that it doesn't mix well with political activism. What are your thoughts on that argument?
Can you repeat that again?
Does Buddhism mix with political activism?
If we say that Buddhism is not, going along with the political activism, ours is, we are trying to find the truth, not just playing a politics. Okay? Tibet was an independent country. History can prove. Nobody can deny that Tibet was not an independent country. But somehow, the Chinese have taken away. But the Tibetans, because of, our leaders, a very broad, thinking and the compassion, he is willing to, share Tibet with the Chinese by choosing the middle way approach. That is very difficult for any country or for any leader to do something like that. But we are willing to. Tibetan Women's Association, we 100% follow His Holiness Dalai Lama's middle way approach, and we support that. And how much you think about the difficulties that you face, the middle way approach is the best way. We don't harm anybody. There's no war. But through understanding, we try to help each other. Both the people of both the countries meet together and enjoy. So that is what our stand. Middle way approach. And then what did you say? What else did you say? Sorry.
No, that answered the question.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you. Do you think His Holiness the Dalai Lama should be more active and protest politics? So should he attend protests and support protesters?
See, when we protest, it's not what you call it, a violent protest. Wherever you see Tibetan people protesting, it's always non-violent protest. That means we have to create awareness in this world among the people of different faiths, what is happening in Tibet. If you believe in your a sort of a religion or whatever it is, you won't like to see another person suffering or not paying attention. So why we protest is to create awareness among the people of the world, to say something, to act something. We are not asking them to start a war with the Chinese. No. Just to let the people realize what is happening in Tibet. I mean, we all talk about, set of, what you call it, United Nations, and all the top countries are meeting there every year, what topics they discuss about. Whenever there's, a strong nation talks something, everybody listens to that person, whether he's right or wrong. That is the time each country or each leader has to be very strong to support if you believe in human rights. Otherwise, there's no point talking about human rights. We say, I'll support you, the Chinese have done wrong to you and things like that. When an important discussion comes up between the leaders of the different nations, who has got a very important role in that to decide, that is the time that one has to raise the topic and stand on their feet. If we talk about, say, okay, if I say something like that on behalf of Tibet, then we will lose our trade relationship with the Chinese. We will lose something. So that way you cannot, anybody, cannot really, stand for human rights. We talk about human rights too freely, but it has to be practical. That's what I feel.
Do you think the Dalai Lama should lead protests, though, maybe like Gandhi did?
No. The Dalai Lama will never lead a protest. And in fact, he always advises there should be no violent protests. For example, I'll tell you, in Tibet, for the past few years, since 2009 till today, more than 150 Tibetan lives have gone by self-immolating. But if the Tibetans have got the wrong thinking, if they want to harm anybody, each one of them who self-immolated can harm hundreds of people or properties there. But they have not done. They have self-immolated because they cannot bear the Chinese rule there. But they have not harmed anybody there. So that is our stand in our religion, we believe. We don't harm anybody. The world has to realize that these things are happening and we should do something about it.
In the unfortunate circumstances of the Dalai Lama's passing, how will the Tibetan Women's Association move on from that?
See, first of all, we are not thinking that way. He will live long. Okay. And if the time really comes, of course, Tibetans will never want to lose him. But physically, even if he leaves this life, physically if he goes away. But then maybe just a few, like a short period that we will be, without a Dalai Lama.
Do you think the Dalai Lama will ever return to Tibet?
Tibet? That is a very, very big question. Dalai Lama wants to go back to Tibet. We want him to go back to Tibet, and the Tibetan people in Tibet wants him to go back to Tibet. Why? They are self-immolating. When they are giving, up their full life burning, the last words that occurs from their mouth is that Dalai Lama should come back. So he will definitely go back in his life. That's what we believe. Yeah.
And finally, what are your hopes for the future of Tibet?
Oh, the hopes are great. My hope is we go back to Tibet in whatever condition under the leadership of His Holiness, and the Tibetans in Tibet and exile will be united. That's it.
Thank you so much for your time. It was an honor to interview you on behalf of the University of Arkansas. We hope that by recording your stories and publishing them online, that we've helped preserve your voice and your viewpoint for future generations of Tibetans. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And actually, I didn't expect this type of an interview. I thought we normally have, people coming and giving them talks on, what we do and the background of Tibetan Women's Association, things like that. But I didn't know this is a very elaborate one, and I was not prepared. So if I've made any mistakes, I really would like to say I'm very, very sorry. And whatever I said during this interview is from the core of my heart.
It was wonderful and inspiring.
So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. There's no need to apologize.
Thank you very much. Thank you.